In the U.S., unfortunately, with exception of a few exceptional individuals such as Thomas Massey, I just don't see that kind of, I don't see a party. That's maybe part of the problem, is that we have this two-party system, and a multi-party system maybe makes it easier for an opposition, a real opposition, to rise. You start off small and you can grow.
Are we defining the opposition as a party that is rejecting Western hegemony? Is that what
I would say that.
Saying?
Right. Yeah.
So right. So we're seeing those movements beginning to take root in Europe, but they can't take root really in the United States, because we're saying against ourselves in a way, right? Because we have that idea. Right, but that's how people think about it. Against the U.S.
But there are ways, you can, like Thomas Massey and other libertarians, can draw on U.S. traditions. It was, our founding fathers warned us against this, and other, greats in American history have warned against, the temptation to empire. And so I think that, it was Pat Buchanan that says, it's time to become, back in the 90s, he was fighting, say, okay, now it's time to cease to be an empire and to become a republic again. I mean, you can make calls that are very solidly based in the American tradition to have a more humble foreign policy. And we used to even hear that. Even under George W. Bush, again, he ended up doing the exact opposite, but he talked about having a more, humbler foreign policy. So it's not like, I think you could still have it. It's not like you can make very powerful arguments, that against U.S.-led hegemony within the U.S. and say, hey, this is bad for us. This is corrupting us. Let's focus on our own problems. You kind of see the beginnings of that already, with the hurricanes. A lot of people are saying, why are you talking about Israel? Why are you talking about Ukraine? Let's help the people in Appalachia and in Florida. So there, at least you hear some noise from the bottom, but we just don't have a party that's committed to this in any sort of consistent and coherent way.
Right. So you think that's kind of the only way out for the U.S. is if we can kind of fan that little kernel of our tradition of being a republic and not going out looking for monsters to slay, right, and the empire take it at home. And there is something there at the heart of America that we can hopefully fan the flames and grow that movement. I mean, I don't like to get political. I mean, both parties that we were just talking about, between Pepsi and Coke, but there does feel to be something. There's at least something different about Trump. It's hard to trust him, hard to know exactly where he stands, but there is a bit of that America First movement, right, in the Trump camp. I know he's a fervent Zionist, and I know he's just saying, I'm going to put 100% tariffs on anybody who doesn't want to use the U.S. dollar. So who knows? He could go terribly wrong the other way. But there are
He's claimed
elements of it.
Right. I mean, just an example, he claimed that he threatened to bomb Moscow, and then, it's the kind of, who knows? But but occasionally he does say things that reflect, he does say things that are anti-globalist. And that's one of the reasons why there's just this hysteria within the elite against him. I think actually I think a lot of the elite have realized that he's actually not a threat to them. And so he's getting a lot of money this time. The first time around, he was vastly outspent by the Democrats, because the establishment as a whole saw this guy as a terrible threat, because he was making these anti-globalist statements. And I think, those are real thoughts in his head. He's not just pretending, but he just has no consistency. When he gets in power, somebody says, oh, no, you need to do this. He's, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that, or whatever. Then he tweets something else out. But anyway, let's not talk about Trump's personality. But yeah, I mean, that's even now, I think that's part of his appeal, is that he sometimes does express this anti-globalist message. It's just that I don't think there's any reality behind it. I mean, it's not that, I don't think he's just putting on a show, but the guy is just incapable of really carrying through on it.
Right. Well, that's pretty depressing then. So what did we do as...
like I say, I'm very pessimistic. I'm very pessimistic about, let's say, the short-term or medium-term future of America, because I just don't see an intelligent, coherent opposition. In Europe, you can actually point to certain parties that, that do articulate that. Most of them are on the so-called right. I mean, I think they would be called leftists, a few decades ago, but they're now called far right, which is just absurd. Some of them are considered leftists, like in Slovakia, or we have the Left Party in Germany. But they are, and one of the things I like about like the Left Party in Germany, unlike a lot of the right wing populist parties in Europe, is that it's not only opposed to support for Ukraine, it's also strongly opposed to support for Israel. You tend to get, Zionism has quite a bit of influence. I don't even know if it's really Zionism or it's just a fear on the part of a lot of the right. And I've heard this about, for example, the AfD in Germany. There's I forget the man's name again. He has his own YouTube channel. It's an Armenian from Syria who's living in Germany. But he's actually talked to a lot of the AfD. And he finds, they're completely on the same page when it comes to Ukraine. And he says, well, what about Israel? And it's not like most of them are, I don't think they respond like American politicians, like, what are you talking about, our holy ally Israel? It's just like, we just don't want to deal with that. I think it's because they're so afraid of being associated with the Nazis, that they just have an official policy of we support Israel to try to protect them from that. They still get called Nazis, but I think that's what you find in Germany and in France and some other Western European countries. It's not a real, grassroots-based devotion to Israel, which you do find in this country, but it's just a kind of a strategy, an electoral strategy to protect themselves from, charges of truly being far right.
Interesting. Well, just going back to the U.S. really quick. So do you think that it's possible then for us to go back to being kind of a republic in that form of government? Or do you think that it just, when you're looking at our current political system and our presidential candidates, the election's in 2 weeks, do you think it makes any difference? And if it doesn't, does that just mean that we're just going to wait for a full collapse of the government and then try to build a republic out of the ashes?
I'll have to say that I almost forgot that there's going to be an election in 2 weeks. I have never been so uninterested in an election. I mean, I think the candidates on both sides are just complete non-entities. And it just, the whole thing is so absurd and so undignified. I just don't, occasionally I take a peek at it and I just shake my head. It's just some sort of freak show, this is we're the head of the free world. This is the light on top of the hill that we're supposed to be shining the rest of the world. I know.
Trump and Kamala Harris.
Right. But who knows what I just can't point to anything, that we could build on right now. Just some ideas out there, a few individuals, but that's just not enough to make a movement. Again, like I said, things can change more rapidly sometimes than you can imagine. And so maybe there will be some sort of breakthrough moment in the near future. But right now, I just don't see it. I don't really have any hope for the U.S. So, a collapse probably would be good because that would be a chance to rebuild. The worst thing would just be sort of a long, slow death, which is maybe what we're witnessing. But
Right. And the death comes as the government becomes more and more authoritarian. We'll see further crackdowns on speech, more attempt to control the narrative, and just control in general. And then that's kind of what slowly leads to that breakdown. It gets to a point, but it's just like, how dark will it get and for how long before we have some real change? Because it just seems like that's kind of the path that we're going, that we're just going deeper down into the cave instead of turning around and going back out and towards the light. And it sounds like you don't believe that we have any political willpower in our elite to turn around, even with the Trump or the American First movement. It doesn't sound like for you believe that there's a solution there.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I wish I was somewhat hopeful about some of the comments he made back in 2016, and then he just didn't carry through on any of it. And actually, many cases, the opposite happened. you still hear this, like Trump is going to take apart NATO or is going to withdraw the U.S. from NATO. He made some comments which were true. They say, well, NATO has outlived its usefulness. Why do we have NATO anymore? He said that back in 2016. But under his administration, NATO expanded. And, NATO budgets increased. So the opposite happened. He talked about making peace with Russia, but in sanctions intensified. Ukraine was armed before. Obama had tried to hold off on that, but he lifted the restrictions. Trump did. So I think in the end you have to look at what he did rather than what he says.
Okay, well, keep your expectations low, and then you won't be disappointed, right?
Okay.
So,
well, I think it's just being realistic. It's just it's important to be realistic.
I guess sometimes I hope that there'll be some type of change as I hear things about Elon Musk could become the Department of Efficiency and just slash 90% of the government, and then we could go save a lot of money and turn things around. And the only thing I guess with Trump, I know he's bombastic and it's hard to know where his head is, but he at least will seem to be willing to talk to adversaries. So I imagine if he could talk to Pezeshkian, I think that would be a very encouraging sign. If he could talk to Putin, talk to Xi Jinping, and then
I'm only going to be
things down,
hopeful if he's elected and he doesn't appoint the same old swamp creatures into the foreign policy and military establishment. I mean, if he appoints some real dissidents, then I will be excited. But I'm just not holding my breath.